So hey everybody, name is Nin. I'm the CEO of Snappelia. Let me tell you about our Fund 10 challenge setting, the OSDE open source development ecosystem. Again, we're pioneering a path to equal opportunities for everyone that includes championing for the open source development. And see, the problem is that there's no open source challenge in Fund 9. And because of that, people don't really talk about open source on Cardano and Catalyst. I really miss that. 60% less open source project in Fund 9 versus Fund 8. You look at the Cardano idea scale. There's 1,000 to almost 1,200 mentions in Fund 8 that had an open source OSDE challenge versus 507 mentions in F9 for open source. And that's in a big part as a result of having no dedicated open source funding in Fund 9. Our solution is to have the OSDE open source dev ecosystem challenge in Fund 10. We're asking for 1 million ADA for this challenge setting, which is almost 8% of the Fund 10 challenge setting budget. And our goal is to have more open source projects, devs, and users improve visibility and quality of the open source projects, and overall improve the open source infrastructure. Because we want projects to grow open source on Cardano. Funding the open source ecosystem means advancing the public good and growing the ecosystem of experts building and maintaining the foundations of Cardano, because Cardano blockchain is 100% open source. Here's a quick video for those of you that don't know what open source is.
What is open source software? At the most fundamental level, it's software its code is available for all users to inspect, modify, copy, and use in almost any way they choose. While many casual users of open source software may never utilize this defining feature, its inclusion brings with it significant philosophical and developmental implications. Computer software is developed by writing code in one of any number of programming languages. Before this code can be run as a computer program, however, it first must be compiled. This process converts the programmer's code into computer binary, which is necessary to be run by a computer, but makes it indecipherable to people. Commercial software, often called proprietary software, also has additional licensing that further prohibits people from attempting to reverse engineer this process. But with open source software, the original programming is made available alongside the final executable program. This means skilled programmers can modify applications to improve or customize them, students can study how the programs were written, and the programs can be easily copied and distributed over the internet. Proponents of open source software believe open collaboration allows software to evolve via the contributions of many users, and they believe people should have the right to use their software in whatever way they want without licensing restrictions. Critics often worry the open source approach can lead to difficulty in managing the program, and they wonder how reliable and sophisticated programs can be developed without a clear profit incentive. These concerns are not unfounded. There are hundreds of different versions available of the open source operating system Linux, even a Hannah Montana version. And because distribution of open source software isn't managed by commercial entities trying to uphold their reputations, it's easy to find poorly developed, buggy, and outdated open source projects online. But this doesn't mean the open source approach doesn't work. To the contrary, much of the internet was built on open source software, and many people use open source software on a daily basis without even realizing it. According to its website, WordPress powers 26% of all websites. Firefox, whose market share has been slipping in recent years, is still the third most popular web browser in the world. VLC Media Player has almost 100 million downloads, Moodle remains the #2 LMS in higher education, and Apache software is still the most popular way to run a web server. So who builds all this free software? Many contributors are the same people that use them and want to make them work better. In fact, many companies hire programmers to make improvements to open source software for their own purposes, but which are then shared back with the rest of the software's community. Students and new programmers may also contribute to projects as a way to practice and build a reputation. Even large for-profit companies like Google and IBM contribute to open source projects because they know the power of crowdsourcing and that building software that benefits everyone can benefit them as well. Open source software is not a new idea, but many people are unaware of what it is and how it works. A little more understanding about how the open source philosophy works and the potential of open source software can give you a new perspective on how you think about computer software and collaboration in general.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. So you've heard about open source, why it's important. Let me tell you about the market itself. Open source services, open source equals opportunity because the market is growing at 20%. Last year, it was $21.7 billion. In about 4 years, it'll be $50 billion market. And one of the reasons why is because there's a demand for tailored open source services, digital transformation because of COVID drove everything towards tech, and there's new advanced technologies, IoT, cloud, AI, blockchain that drives this further. Typically, here's the top 40 open source projects from DevOps to IT operations and data analytics, right? But when you think about in our industry, Web3 and blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, all of them are open source. And why now, right? Now is the time because in Web3, monthly active users are at the all-time high. And more developers are coming in every day, every month. And we need to incentivize them to build open source. The reason why that's important is because so that the community will benefit from their knowledge and from transparent access to solutions that they're building. So our challenge brief and challenge question is, can we build a community-owned open source ecosystems that's commercially viable to drive growth, increase opportunities and visibility for the whole ecosystem, for the Cardano community, right? And why is it important? It's important because we need experts and developers who are able to work on complex software and maintain an open source foundation of Cardano, right? And success for us is to have more open source projects, open source teams, and developers and experts who collaborate, who join forces, right? It's not closed proprietary software. We're talking about open source tooling and open source projects. Here's some of our key metrics we've defined very clearly on our challenge setting. At SnapReal, we care very deeply about the open source ecosystem, right? We got funded in F8 to bring more funding for open source and advancing the public good. Part of the team, we have two very experienced and passionate challenge teams from F6 to F8, including Patrick, Susie, and Simon, as well as we've done like 8+ the after town halls on open source topics itself. We were able to partner with IOHK, who have a ton of active open source contributors, and the open source Cardano Alliance is coming soon. We partner with many in the Cardano DAO Alliance as well, many which are also completely building open source or have a huge heart for open source. For example, ADAO is building decentralized open source DAO tooling. Liquid did that for Agora DAO tooling that's open source on their GitHub. Prism is going to launch their stuff open source when ready. Konma, you guys have a heart for open source. And me and Vinay have connected initially on contributing to open source projects. And then you have MLabs, Clear Contracts, and BossDAO. As well as the SSI Alliance, the Self-Sovereign Identity Alliance, right? Many of these solutions here that you see, like Roots ID, Proofspace, they're all open source. So who's on the team? Besides me and Patrick, Johnny, the head of open source at IOHK, and Simon, my folks at Snapbilia, as well as Luke at MLabs. We're real people. Here's joining me and a couple of other folks. Thank you for your attention. Please vote. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nin. I always love when you say we are real people.
It's true. Some people thought that I'm a bot, especially when I was giving tickets away.
I believe George has a question here.
Yeah, thanks, Nin.
Yes.
Very good presentation. Two presentations today, so very both good. So yeah, especially the challenge setting from the open source perspective. You had shared the comparison of open source with the general overall. What do you see as a picture? So if you were to draw a line saying, okay, this is the general corporations and this is the crypto world, how would you see that between the two from open source acceptance and the journey into crypto with more open, like what do you see?
So I am from Web2 world, and sorry, George, just was hearing echo. So I'm from the Web2 world, and I can tell you, unless you're a bigger company or really someone who is dedicated to open source, let's say you're building dev tooling or data analytics or some kind of infrastructure, OS operating system infrastructure that you need, like community collaboration and input from other devs, you're likely not going to open source, right? You see the slide where it was top 40 open source projects that usually one way or the other touch these three major buckets, us to say, right? And the reason why is companies usually want to have things proprietary, they want to make money on it, and they don't want to bother with figuring out how to make money on open source. That's not like in the nature of Web2 startups and Web2 companies, right? Now, in the Web3, it's completely different. Most of the projects here, right, are open source because of Bitcoin. Really, because Bitcoin does it, and they're leading the market, and that's a huge blessing for the whole industry, right? Everybody else does it. Now we are in the adoption stage, however, which like the early adopters, the hacker ethos, right, was just build it, put it on GitHub, see what happens, right? Um, Now we have more and more projects entering the space. You can see there's more and more active developers, right, in Web3, all-time high recently. And it's important for us to be able to incentivize these builders to build open source because they may not know the whole history, right, of Web3. They may not even care at some point. They just see an opportunity to build, right? So it is important to incentivize them and put money where our mouth is, right? If we say we support open source ecosystem, we should really support it. I hope that answers your question, George.
Thank you, Nin.
Yeah, thanks, Nin.
Again, when it comes to open source, how you've brought everyone together and your efforts towards building these teams, I would like really appreciate that. And we are like almost there. We would have people from Konma in the open source development teams very soon for sure.
Awesome. If this, please vote, right? Please vote. This is a very important challenge. Like any of the other challenges, even they're development or non-development focused. Only this challenge requires the projects and proposals to be open source,
Yeah.
right? And it'll be there when you guys are ready. I'm excited for that.
Thanks, Nim.
Yep.
So,
Similar approach for the last fun challenge. We had like Konma opened it. So hopefully now I guess we can just pass on that work to this one over here. And, you know.
Guys, we are super collaborative. If you guys want to join and help us, we always need help, right? Patrick has been leading this charge for a long time, right? He's the original OSDE challenge poster, and he also needs help. I need help. Johnny needs help, and you get to hang out with us, right? Really meet us, and like we all share passion for the open source ecosystem, open source projects, and building open source. Because as Cardano grows, right, we want to share more knowledge to people and also to new developers who are just trying to learn, right? One of the key tenets there was because the code is open, people can go read it and learn how the application was built and how it works. You can see an example of MainSwap recently, right? Because they open source their source code, the community forgot which specific team, but the community was able to go and identify a security vulnerability that could have locked 195 million, you know, dollars worth of tokens on chain. That and that's really the power of open source. One of the examples of most of the world servers right now run on Linux, for example, or one of the distributions of Linux, right? I bet Gather is built on open source. Like people use open source every day. If you have a phone, and if you have a browser, if you have a computer, some portions are open, and those
I mean,
portions are
the
usually the
best
most
stress
secure.
on that is the fact that iOS, Mac, as well as Windows is actually based on Linux. That itself should open up all
Yep.
the eyes for everyone. But definitely, Nin, I think we'll have to make a special. I'm so sorry. I think we'll have to schedule like a separate call for this because I mean we have some updates for you. At least me and Vinay do with all the things that
Awesome.
should happen.
Let's do it.
So
Let's
we'll
do it,
definitely
Sangeet.
do that.
Let me
Over to you,
add
please.
one thing, please. I want to share, if you don't mind. Uh, Open source is about contributing to public good, and it's also about sharing success stories, make video presentations, share slides. I tell you a success story. It's brief. Eclipse in 2003. They started with very complex software. They made it open source, and IBM decided the best way was to make conferences, have presentation, share the slides and documents with people. These people, basically, this resulted in having more people understanding complex technologies, thanks to this presentation, which are quick to read, or more complex docs. Presentation are for orienting. And then this resulted also in more people understanding success cases, which means more people are coming to our marketplace, and they will be able to make flourish, grow the ecosystem. And yeah, that's also part of my vision. Wanted to share with you this. That's it.
Awesome. You know,
Thank you, Patrick. Thank
yeah,
you.
we are really supporting each other, and Patrick is like the core of the heart of this OSD challenge.
Okay.
So thanks for joining, man.